Okay, so.
Okay. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome on my part as well. What made us appear here, because we are a pure logistics company, we also like to be seen as problem solvers. Why are we here? Well, because of the biomass that we transported and have been transporting through Germany and across Europe, we have reached a state that caused the market to ask us, can you supply biomass to us for our plants? We're talking about power plants here, but also biochar manufacturers. Here you see an overview on who we are, Brüning Group. We are based in Fischerhude, close to Bremen. Next year, we will move to Bremen with our office as well, but we also have sites in Copenhagen, Paris, and Munich. Just because biomass is transported cross-border more and more in Europe, the plants have dimensions that can't be managed locally. We see energy supplying bulk goods. This is the buzzword here. We don't only deal with biomass, but with high energy bulk goods. This is waste to energy, be it the private household waste, the industrial waste of the municipalities, but also plastics and all the wooden products and solids flow from the food industry and the agricultural industry. 5,000 suppliers and more. You see the number here, and the priority is still Germany, but we are expanding. Here you see the current data we have on consumers that use forest wood chips and shredder. We are not the only supplier. This means they get their biomass from other sources, but if you have a look at here, 4.5 million tons only for chips and shredder. There are other types of biomasses, of course. But if I think about building a new plant somewhere, in any event, I should consider if I have large consumers close by that already absorb a large part of the local market. I shouldn't build something next door. We know that for Germany and the bordering regions, in the next years, projects will be implemented or are already being implemented that will bring or that will require more than 1 million tons of additional biomass. And we're either directly involved in the planning to cover the supply, or just because of the network we know from. This is something we are aware of, but we cannot cover that demand locally anymore. This is the 2021 situation. The dots, these are loading stations we work with. Germany is relatively well covered, but we are expanding gradually. Here, I only took into account the products here, waste wood, sieve residues, agro residues. In 2021 alone, this amounted to 2.8 million tons of biomass we moved. 81,000 transports with more than 1,200 suppliers. If you just take this into account, the trucks were heavily overloaded. So this means we don't only use trucks, but also domestic transport by ship, maritime, on rivers, etc. So this means if there is a need, a demand for biomass, or if you think about a project, we can only recommend that you analyze the biomass situation at an early point in time, or just come up and talk to us. We'll be pleased to see if it makes sense, what is close by, and what biomass you could actually use or count on. Here you see an overview on different materials. We've heard quite a lot about that today. We have waste wood, shredder material, chips. These are common materials that are used, particularly in incineration. Agro residues or from food production very often are more difficult to be immediately incinerated. One, because it can be waste, and there is a waste key. Can I incinerate it? How can I use it? Or is it used in other industries? Because if you have a look at the food industry in particular, do we have huge amounts lying around? No, because there are logistics supply chains for this type of biomass already. And if we have a look at that, in Germany, we can say we were an biomass export country for a long time. This has turned around in the last years. This means we need to import biomass in Germany. But that means for all the plants that are supposed to be built, the question is, do I have enough biomass? No. At least the supply chain hasn't been developed to the point that I can make use of it right now. Of course, there are some sites where there's more and I can grab it. But who will I be competing with in the long run? These are the large incinerating plants, the sawmills, panel manufacturers, and agriculture. This means if I need biomass from somewhere, I will take it away from someone or have to buy the biomass elsewhere. Usually that only works if you have a good concept or if you pay a lot of money. You need to be aware of this. If I want to build something new, I need to control it through the price. You need to be aware of this. Here you see examples of different plants we deliver to. I put in here 100 kilometers because very often people say we produce local biomass and then it's 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, no problem. Indeed, this is a certain plant. If we go there with biochar, that will take some while this year, next year, such a plant will not be built there. But they accept many different products they can use. And although they take this variety, we are not able to reach the 100 kilometers. And in the last 3 years, this has been a continuous development. And this is a huge number of supplies as well. The truck performance, the ship performance, logistics performance, that's what's needed here. But that also means if my plant has a certain size, I need to think about, if I don't have the biomass on site, how can I ensure logistics? Can I get there with a truck? Do I need a material so that a port close by would be good? Or do I have a plant that can chop the wood for me? Form a railway that I could make use of. This is what we look into when developing new concepts. This is more towards the east. We see tree management and wood chips coming from landscape management materials. This is always very nice because it is available everywhere, but not throughout the year. And here, we can take a lot from this plant because of the price situation. But here, there's quite a a large area. Why that logistics? Because there's a lot of highway coverage. And there is quite a lot of landscape management material that is available because of the highways and the railways. And this is why logistics pays off. Let's go towards more smaller plants. Now we are at 25,000. Here I've chosen the example of a plant that only accepts green waste shredder. Why only that? It's clear. No matter who we are talking about, certification plays an important role. Is it sustainable? Do I want it? Can I have it? And are there any other subsidies? Navarro bonus or any other legislation, RED 2. If they say my plant is only profitable if I take this or that biomass that has a subsidy and I don't have much, I must accept that I'll have quite a large radius from where I need to get my biomass from. This brings us to a plant size that we already see in the field of biochar and which will be added. But can we manage the 100 kilometers? No, we can't. Let me tell you a story. We have plants that advertised like that. We are such a plant. We have local biomass. We can do that. 100 kilometers, easy. Politically approved, great ecosystem, eco plant. We can do that. And then they called me and said, we don't have anything. The 100 kilometers of a radius are exhausted. We don't have any material. The policymakers didn't do anything. They said, in your application for this concept, you guaranteed the 100 kilometers. So you're not going to get the material from elsewhere. They had to lower their production and pay more. And really had to tear away the biomass from someone else. Otherwise, they would have been taken off the grid because nobody wanted to extend the approval to buy from further away. Let me give you a tip. If you focus on regional production, don't be rigid. Say, we'll try. We take it into account. If possible, we'll stay local, but don't commit to it. This is a topic that has to do with the delivery concepts. Very often before the concepts are built, the plants are built, they come to us and ask us, can you develop a logistics concept for us and compare it to the site, evaluate it to see if that makes sense and what biomass we can use? Because it's available and because there is a proof of certificates. Can we know what certificates will be needed in the long run? And we help if these questions arise. Plants of up to 400,000 tons. This is our range, and we draw up concepts to generate this biomass. What plants do we have? New plants, of course. But there was also a discussion that things are changing again because of the current situation. Former coal-fired power plants, converting them, that's a topic. We don't want coal anymore. What can we do? Biomass, waste wood chips. But these are power plants. In order for these power plants to have that result, we can even use an inland ship, a big ship, and start this next ship right away because they burn so much. And these topics will come up more in future. But we will take this a step further, particularly at international level. Given the current pricing situation, logistic routes are considered that were not interesting a year or two ago. But the prices for biomass is something that can be transported from the south of Europe to the north of Europe. The logistics chains can pay for that and can guarantee that. So it's affordable and can be guaranteed. Connecting by inland routes and train is always interesting, particularly if we're talking about a larger plant. What you also have to take into account, are we talking about seasonal biomass that isn't available the whole year through? We've heard yesterday Christmas trees. There's a lot of biomass that's only available at a certain point in time of the year. What can I do about that? Am I willing to have a large area where I can store these materials? What biomass do I have? And when we talk to our partners, our business partners, one of the biggest problems, particularly in this area of biomass supply, that's not the incineration, it's not the plant as such, but coming from the warehouse to the plant. It's the last mile, so to speak, the last 100 meters. That's the biggest problem in all the facilities. Because even if we like to have a homogeneous mass as biomass, it isn't. There's always a branch, for instance, a stick. Or I have a large container, wonderful chips. They look great. I can put them into the system and tomorrow they will be done. 2 hours later, the system is down. Why that? Because it only looked great at the top. Underneath, there were 15 logs shredded into that, including the soil. So if we deal with biomass, there are always impurities, can be, we saw before the waste, there's hardly any plastic in it, but there are these impurities that you need to struggle with. And you just be aware of this, that this is happening. Metal, nails, old wood, waste wood. Round wood, no problem, is in the forest. I just use it in the plant, produce some chips, and that's it. No, that doesn't work. There can be problems. The big sawmills have a metal separation unit because you still have grenade fragments from the World War. They are still in the wood, and I also have them in my system. You don't think about that at first, but this is something you need to be aware of. If I have a concept, what kind of biomass am I going to take? The market price development. In order to describe it to you, I'm going to cluster the products. First, the saw secondary products. Everything that comes from the sawmill is nicely dry, it is dry and homogeneous. On the right-hand side, I've got the biomass and waste wood I've summarized, and at the bottom, I've got the chips in different tree care material. This is how I clustered it. Let's have a look at it. This is the development from 2019 to August 2022. In 2019, we started at a high level. We're always referring to the 2019 average price for the sawmill secondary products or side products. It's okay, but here you see how prices are rising. We did not see that coming either. And this problem is reflected in the supply contracts. This means, as a plant operator, I want to have a good and long-term biomass supply at a constant price. This is no longer possible regarding biomass. We couple our price to other products, or we also have certain contractual concepts we develop with our partners so that there is some leeway to react to market price fluctuations. With that, we want to make sure that the risk is not with one party alone, because this is something nobody could foresee. and the biomass price is in line with the gas and electricity price. It's growing in parallel. Of course, you can counteract that trend by taking other materials. The chips also see the same effect, but it's not that dramatic. Biomass is also pleasant, but you can see this price increase like a red thread. So if you plan a plant, be flexible, opt for different materials from different areas so that you can buffer off fluctuations, because otherwise you'll have to cope with every price explosion, and it's not going to be less in the years to come. There will always be effects, natural disasters, damage, beetles, whatever, things that you need to take into account. And all this happens at international level as well. I mentioned it before, the seasonal character. At the top, you see our biomass. Why does it look like that? This depends on our products. We have a lot of bark in our product portfolio. And if you look at this is March, May, again, the gardening season starts. They all put the bark into the garden. It looks beautiful. This is one example of things that we weren't so aware of during COVID. But everybody used it during COVID for their gardens. In blue, the sawmill side products, they don't have a seasonal development. There are other market systems that come to play. But the chips, with the chips heating systems, this needs to be taken into account. There's a strong seasonal character. Don't forget, think about what's interesting for you and what do you need to pay attention to so as to not fall into that trap. On that note, I'd like to thank you for that. I think we managed quite well. You didn't fall asleep. Thank you very much, Mr. Halfer. Are there any questions? I'm going to be cheeky enough and ask a question because I have the microphone in my hand. After listening to your presentation, I'd say that fossil fuels are still way too cheap. If it's worthwhile transporting biomass from the south of Spain, 30,000 tons transported to the southeast of Germany or wherever it was, I mean, this is exactly what we do not want. And you were saying we have coal-fired power plants that need to be restructured. They need to be filled. Well, I'd say that no, we want smaller, more flexible, decentralized systems in order to be able to counteract these fluctuations. Or is your company philosophy the bigger the better? Yes, of course you can say that. That's no problem at all. And we also expected that question. Of course, what happens if we can solve things locally? Of course we do so. We take this step. That's clear. If we can build up local supply chains with short distances, that's our first choice. If that pays off and it can be done price-wise, of course. But if something happens politically, or if I need to guarantee the supply security as a large energy provider or utility, let's say I provide Amsterdam with electricity, or and I can't get hold of local biomass, the penalties, the fines I need to pay in order to explain to customers, I'm very sorry that you can't. You can leave your TV off. There's a blackout, no football on Sunday. Of course, there are market situations that come to play that enable these transports from happening. But seen towards the future, of course, you must see if that's something you want. The CO2 price is one possibility, because the distance will be smaller that I can transport something and deliver something to a certain plant and it still pays off. So the CO2 emissions is a good regulator. But the question is, can I have that many systems here? Because local biomass is limited. Then there is no local biomass. Heike Nitsch, Institute for Rural Structural Research. You clearly said who biochar is competing with, the big incinerating plants. And then you say, if you plan it, you need to control through the price. I would say, no, policymakers need to control this and steer this. We cannot incinerate that much biomass in future. We're also talking about climate protection. CO2 is released instantaneously. So if biochar in the future shall be scaled up as we want for climate protection reasons, this needs to go to the detriment of incineration. As Ms. Kaman said, can we transport biomass from that far away? That's clear. But this presentation made it very clear to me what competition is there, what is the real competition. And I think that political framework conditions are needed here to get a grip on that. Yes and no. From a political point of view, yes, the policymakers need to make a statement and they need to set the framework for a goal. The politicians do that through subsidies or by reducing the subsidies. And the pure incineration, that this reflects the market in the long run, I don't think so. You can see already that things happen politically. Europe is considering things. There's discussion on a biomass strategy. So a lot is developing. But what else is important? The pricing, the price cap that will come hasn't been mentioned here. There will also be a positive, a political effect on the market price development. But changing that completely doesn't make sense. The framework conditions are defined. There are certain subsidies, and the market will adapt. Because if I have a plant that only produces electricity, they can't pay the prices for biomass as compared to someone who produces electricity, use the residual heat and includes it in the local grid, and also has biochar, biomethane, whatever, offering these products. This is the company that can pay more for the biomass at the end of the day. And this is an automatic market adaptation. A political framework, yes, but I wouldn't want to put a cap on it and saying that, or lid on it saying that's not possible. Another request for the floor? I'm responsible, I work for CO2 Levy Association. That was a very interesting presentation. It was a horror scenario. We will never reach our climate mitigation targets. This is why my question is, have I understood you correctly? That you're really transporting from one plant to another, from east to west, and is that the same material? Or is there a possibility to optimize that so that the regionalization will happen one day? Or can they only have do they only have a contract with one supplier and the transport doesn't play a role anymore and the distance doesn't play a role anymore? The chips are transported from A to B and they could come from C and it would be much closer. Am I mistaken? You are mistaken, because it doesn't make sense to send the truck cross country if there is no demand. So if I have the demand on site, I don't need to transport it elsewhere because transportation costs are so high that it doesn't make sense. So if we were just going back and forth, that is something that we could stop doing. What happens is that at a certain point in time on site, the material is not available. Focus one is always trying to go short distances so that it's worthwhile regarding logistics, or upscale the volume, meaning I have other means of transport like train or ship to compensate for that. But our focus is short distances. And then we also have questions from our online chat. Yes, there is also a lively discussion. I'd like to summarize it a bit. In principle, we are talking about the portfolio enhancement. How can you use biomass potentials from different sources? Or why don't you mention the forests in the south of Germany on your map, for instance? Well, we're always willing to develop other flows. We heard this morning that there are volumes you can develop, but you can also think about certain things. If do I need to transport the material here, or can I put the plant? Can I erect the plant somewhere else? Is it useful to do it all in Germany? I don't know, but we need the energy here. How can I transport the energy to Germany? So this is a kind of quandary, but we are always trying to develop new material flows, be it residual products from the food industry. I think the topic was very interesting. We heard from bones. All these are materials that haven't been developed to the point that they can contribute to this overall concept. They're not available yet. Pyrolysis plants, for instance, but also materials that go to the construction industry as additives, as filling materials. We can really rethink in that the cascades of material use can be expanded. And if something is incinerated at the end, why not? But the preceding cascade needs to be long, as long as possible. And we try to develop the flows further, because the worst thing happening to us is an empty truck. We want to transport the material from here from A to B, and then take load up something and go back and go to a third place, and so on and so forth. We don't want to go empty. Thank you very much. There's one problem that we have in the whole of Germany. What happens to the materials that are still residues? For instance, labels, kilometers of material that was moored on the roadsides, for instance. This is left there, and this brings me back to biodiversity. The soils are increasingly rich in nutrients, and some flowers are asphyxiated, and certain plants die, and there's a dramatic loss of species. Also on side strips of the road. We need to consider this valuable biomass. Maybe we can talk about that later on. Here we are talking about regional circles, a radius of 30 to 50 kilometers. This is definitely a topic for us, particularly landscape management material, be it next to railway tracks or highway lanes or in the field. We don't have a uniform system, no uniform waste code number or waste code. In some lender, it's waste, in others it isn't. For instance, in one district, I cannot use it because it needs to remain on site because it's waste. And in other areas, it's not considered, not declared as waste, and I can use it for composting, etc. So this is something we can see. We need to get out of that. If we're talking about biomass, if it's seen as a product, it's much easier to build up other flows of goods. For food, we have the same problem. When is it waste and when is it a product? Depending on the category it is put into, I can include it in the market and I can expand the cascade use. We have that in all the different areas, be it landscape management material, old used paper. I agree There needs to be a clear distinction, a clear categorization, a clear simplification, so that we know how can I reduce waste as a product, but I must make sure that I'm not that I'm still within the legal framework. But biomass as such, if I have a good cascade use or a good material flow, if that's a given, I need to be able to take that out of the waste segment and declare it as a product and use it as biomass. I agree with what you're saying. Another request for the floor in the back, and then here, and then we'll continue. Thank you very much for this exciting presentation. If I've understood it correctly, you transport 2.8 million tons of biomass, your company alone. Looking at the competitors, can you say how much this is in Europe? How much is transported in Europe? And is there a trend? If this biomass volume is increasing, is it decreasing? What's the development? I don't have the total number, but the trend is that it's going to be more. Looking at 1 million additional ton of biomass that will be needed, and the sawmills are not decreasing in size. And as in Germany, we need to import. We will also need to generate biomass from other countries, but that doesn't only affect Germany. In Denmark, it's the same. They also need biomass. They also have biomass power plants or consumers of different types. In any event, the volume is going to increase. I have a quick question. How do you plan to decarbonize your fleet? Because that's what matters now. We are counting on CO2 emission pricing and taking into account the CO2 pricing and adapt to that. But regarding trucks, that's very difficult. We try a lot with new technologies. We try to see what we can do. We have new test vehicles based on gas, for instance. Does it make sense? Is that economically viable? But truth be told, we are a company. And you can put the best trucks. If it's not viable, economically speaking, we're not going to do that for a long time. And we want to make progress, and we like to test new technologies to lower our footprint in general. There's one very urgent request for the floor. I think if that, please be fast, because we are 10 minutes late already. I'll be brief. Metallic of Common EV, Straubing. We're talking about the future, and will the demand for wood increase in the last 3 weeks? I had 3 queries from the industry. A chemical site from Bavaria and a potato starch manufacturer. They need 3-digit gigawatt volumes for steam manufacturing. And they come to us and they ask us if we do see potential to change over to wood from gas for their steam production. They have several hundred thousands of tons of need, of demand. I get goosebumps. And if in the rural area, the coal-fired power plants are supposed to change over to any other type of heating, and we have 15% that comes from renewables, I'm going to not speak anymore. I just wanted to tell you that we shouldn't forget the industry. I don't know where all the wood is supposed to come from. Thank you. Thank you for that comment.